Hey guys, this is Echo Soundworks and you are checking out a Ashes support video. So this is going to be a tip and trick tutorial video in support of our newest sound set, Ashes, which comes with a bunch of Serum presets, massive presets, and it comes with a total of 3.9 gigabytes worth of sounds and samples. So the sound set is inspired by Illenium, Griffin, and to a lesser extent, Seven Lions. And in this video, we'll be checking out how you can get that big chord drop sound that Illenium and Griffin use. So we're just going to be talking about a bunch of different tips and tricks to do that. All right, so we just played through the demo. Now, the first thing you're going to want to do, and this goes without saying, is pull up a chord or a synth patch. If you have Ashes, you're going to have about 40 or 50 of them, but between Serum and Massive. Now, there are two different types of chord sounds that I like to break it down into. There's the first type, which has a lot of movement. Maybe an LFO is controlling the level of the oscillators in the synth, or an LFO or performer is controlling the cutoff. And then there's the second category, which is it's more straightforward. It's just there's maybe a little bit of movement, but it's not like a gated, syncopated type sound. So for the most part, these chord sounds in Illenium and Griffin songs, they're going to be saw, super saw, or square based, right? So now that you kind of have those two ideas in your head, it becomes easier to make the decision. Well, do you want a pretty LFO'd out type chord sound, or do you want to be more straightforward? So let's listen to a couple examples. For instance, this first one I pulled up from Ashes in Serum sounds like this. Right, so it's pretty straightforward. Now, if we go through a couple other ones here, there's a little bit of movement on that, but not a lot. Now, this is one with a lot of movement. If I just hold down a chord, see how it's moving. Now, this is going to really determine the character of your drop, so it is kind of important. Here's another one that's more straightforward, right? So that being said, make that decision early on and maybe just play in some MIDI or kind of find the arrangement that you want and give it a go and see how it feels. All right, speaking of the arrangement, let's go to a patch now in Massive that's called it's called Chord Structive Crispy. I guess I was running out of good names when I was naming the patches. All right, so you can do minor or major oriented chords or dominated chord progressions, right? You could start out with a major chord or start with a minor chord. It'll just have a slightly different feeling. If you want more uplifting, obviously go for like the major. If you want more powerful, potentially even sad, somber, right, go for a more minor dominant progression. So now that we've kind of gotten that out of the way, I want to talk about the different chord structures because I did a video like this for Chainsmoking, and a lot of you guys said I glossed over the arrangement and the kind of music theory of it, side of it a little too much. So we're going to do that right now for those of you who are interested. Now, the chord progression starts with a extension of an F sharp major chord. Right, I'm adding like a 7th and then a 13th above it. Okay, so it's not just a major triad. So I want to do two things real quick. I want to show you that we can play this progression with a whole different chord progression, same key. We're going to go from the one that's more major dominant to one that's more minor. So here's the one as it is. That's the one it was when we just listened to the demo. Now let's mute this MIDI, and what we're going to do is I'm going to play in a minor progression. All right, so obviously it still worked. It works with the lead, kept it in key. It just has more of a minor feel. And what I mean by that is I'm starting out on a minor chord as opposed to a major chord. So it just kind of switches up the vibe. And either one will work for this type of drop or this type of song. Now, what won't work as well is using straight up just boring basic ass triads. And we're gonna look at that real quick. So I'm gonna do the same minor progression I just did, but with basic triads, and you'll see how the vibe and character is just kind of all wrong. right? Like it just didn't sound as fresh as it could. Didn't sound terrible, but yeah, that's why I think that you should try to use chords that aren't just basic triads. Now, if you getting into that is a little bit outside the scope of this tutorial video, but basically just do extension chords above your major or minor triad. So for instance, if I'm doing this B minor down here, the octave above it, I'm going to add some extension notes above it. So instead of doing two minor or B minor triads on top of each other, which would sound like this, I'm going to take my finger off the actual root note of B on my right hand, the higher octave, and then I'm just going to go up to the third. I'm just going to literally do the scale and play those together. So B minor at 11. I could do B minor, a 7 over 11. Right, you just want to add some notes. You don't have to know a lot about theory to do it. You'll probably find some that work and sound good pretty quickly. All right, so another big element of getting an Illenium or Griffin style drop to be the right vibe is also the arrangement of the chords that you're playing. So once you have your chord or synth sound pulled up, and then you get your chords kind of mapped out, you want to then think about the arrangement. And there are two ways to do this. You can kind of have the chords play off of the kick or have it play to the kick. If it's going to play off of the kick, you're going to have some, maybe some syncopation or some rhythmic variances where the chords don't occur all the time on the kick. But one thing that Illenium does a lot is, a lot of other producers, it's pretty interesting, is they put the chord, like the down or the start of each chord, on with the kick. And that's why I did in this demo. So if we look at this real quick, if I unmute this massive patch that we worked with in the last segment, right, if we look at this, the kick happens right there, right there, right there, right there, right? So it's happening every time. So they kind of accent each other and they play to each other. Listen to this. So that's something to be aware of. Now, the arrangement of the chords also should start to play off of the snare. If we bring in the snares with this, you'll notice that the chords have some open space when the snares hit. It goes every other one, right? Open snare. Snare with the sustain of the chord. Now you'll notice that the snare right there is with the sustain of the chord. It's not with an attack. So you don't have to do that. I'm just pointing that out. That's kind of fun maybe to leave some of the snares open, some of them not open in terms of when they play with the chord or the synth patch. But those are some things you want to kind of keep in mind because those have ramifications going forward, especially in terms of what we're going to be talking about in the next segment. Next thing you want to start to do or start to look at is layering, right? If it was just this patch, it's a little boring. So what I did for the drop that we played in the beginning of this video, I layered 3 different sounds together, and they all have kind of different characteristics that play to each other, which is why I layered them. So this first one, which is called Chord Big Clean, is from Serum. It's real glassy, real bright, real subtle, but it's also big at the same time. And there's not a lot of movement in that sound. I layered that with this Structive Crispy one that we've been working with Massive because 2 reasons. That one's kind of like lo-fi and dirty, right? And then also it has a different attack setting than the Chord Big Clean. The Chord Big Clean, right when you hit it, it reaches peak amplitude at the attacked stage, right? Well, this one, I use this one if I'm breaking it down. The attack of envelope 1, which is modulating the cutoff of filter 1, has a bit of attack time. It ramps up, right? So we have this, right? It kind of glides up a little. Well, you pair those two together, and you get some interesting effect, or an interesting effect. Now, that effect of the difference in the attack time will really come into play when we start to sidechain and compress the sounds later in this tutorial video. All right, then the next patch I layered it with is the movement. I'm calling it the movement chord. So with these 2 main patches here, the Chord Big Clean and the Chord Structive Crispy from Massive, If we go back to the first segment of this tutorial, I talked about how you should choose or kind of think, do you want a chord or synth sound that has movement or that doesn't have movement? Well, these don't have movement, right? Like there's no LFO modulating anything. It's not like a gated or like a sequence type sound, and that's fine. But what I wanted to do with this other patch, which I stupidly named Serum Bounce, but I bounced it to audio, but it's one of the patches from Serum. There's an LFO modulating a lot in that patch, and it adds some movement. So that one's not the main sound, though. These other two are louder. But this will add some nice, I don't know, kind of vibe and character to these chord sounds. Let's turn it up and blend it to taste. To hear that, it adds nice movement, but it's not like it's kind of subtle to the point. It's so subtle to the point that the listener would really have to like, oh, there's movement going on. So that's probably more ear candy for producers and other people who actually care about that. But I think it does make a difference if I take that out. I can tell, and I think it sounds nice. But so layer, guys, layer these different patches together. Don't layer sounds that sound the exact same, because why are you layering? Find one that, one that's really clean, one that's dirtier. Maybe find one that has a quick attack time, a longer attack time. Maybe one has a longer sustain, right? Any of those things will kind of add up to key differences that make a brand new whole sound that's nice and thick and sits well in the mix. All right, now the last thing we're going to cover in this video is mixing your chord sounds. And the mixing that we're going to focus on is getting them to sit in the mix and get out of the way of the kick and the snare. And there's two ways to do that. Sidechain compression and good old-fashioned moving shit around. So let's talk about sidechain compression first. It's really important with the Illenium or Griffin style drop to use sidechain compression because you need to get stuff out of the way of a kick, especially if the kicks are happening at the same times of the chords. Now, sidechain compression is something that I think confuses a lot of people, but it shouldn't. You're basically just having a compressor that's only being activated or turned on by the sidechain, which is like a ghost kick, which is a muted kick, or the actual kick in your track. So speaking of those, if we go down to my drum section down here, you'll notice that I have a boatload of muted kicks. And you might be like, well, wow, he can't make a decision and choose a kick. Well, that's true, but not the case in this instance. What I like to do is I like to use different kicks on different chord sounds to get this Illenium vibe, and have maybe one chord sound controlled by ghost kick A, the other chord sound controlled by ghost kick B, etc. The reason I like doing that is depending on the kick sample that you load in, it's going to make the compressor react differently, all things equal in the compressor, right? So for instance, this kick right here, if we zoom in, it's called Illenium kick 06A. It has a shorter kind of decay, right, and sustain than 16G, right? So there's going to be a longer time that the compressor is activated for that kick, this kick, as opposed to this. Now, I also want to sometimes play around with using kicks a ghost kick that isn't the actual kick of my pattern. So this one right here, this Illenium kick 06A, this is just 4 on the floor. It goes boom, 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 right? And I'm going to use that on one of the patches because this one right here, specifically, if we play this and solo these together, you can hear it happening. I'll turn up the compressor. So the output of the kick is still muted, but it still affects the sidechain compression. See that? Now, this hit right there is why I wanted to use a 4 on the floor. I could have also sidechain compressed this to my snare, but my snare samples are kind of like little thin clap samples layered together, right? So I wanted to have a big, meaty kick, get this sustained chord out of the way of that snare where it's sharing space. Right, so let's look at these real quick. This first patch, the chord Big Clean, the sidechain compression is attached to kick 16G, which is this one right here. So if I solo these and play it together, we'll go back up here and we'll pull up the compressor. You can see my settings, quite aggressive. Long release time, short attack. Right? So that's what's going on there. Now, the second patch, which we just looked at, this Chord Destructive Crispy, this is tied to a whole different kick, right? This one is being sidechain compressed by that 4 on the floor kick, which is a whole different sample. So we'll play that. We'll play these two together, actually. Let me just solo these guys for you, and we'll solo these 2 kicks. So we want to solo, let's grab a bunch of them. All right, so let's play these together now. Right, so that's kind of nice. Gives it a nice vibe. Now this third patch, the one with the movement, this is just tied to the actual kick of the track. So it's this one right here, the one that isn't a ghost kick. It's the main kick in the drop. But you layer those together and you get some real interesting movement occurring. All right, so now the next thing I was talking about was the other element of getting these to kind of fit together is good old-fashioned moving shit around, is literally just moving stuff around. So you can, if your track is still in MIDI, you can open up the MIDI, and if we go back to the beginning here, you can see that I've just moved the attack or the initial section of this chord just off of where the kick is, right? I did the same thing with this audio track for the one from Serum. I just literally clipped out a one tick mark on a 64th note grid division, and it helps get it even further off the kick. And it gives a lot more room for your groove to kind of breathe. So there you guys go. There are some tips and tricks to get that Illenium or Griffin style chord sound in your drops. If you have any questions or comments, let me know below, and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. Like I said at the beginning of the video, I'm Echo Sowers. Thank you so much for watching, guys. I will see you next time.